Communion in the hand. Should you do it? What did the early church do? Why did it change, or did it change? Has there always been communion in the hand? And what do the saints say? What do the councils say? What does Thomas Aquinas say? And what happened in the modern church when now it's ubiquitous? We're talking about communion on the hand with co-host Tim Gordon. Tim, how are you?
I'm excellent.
Good. So you and I all the time in these videos talk about how we are not fans of communion in the hand. In fact, you even had a little altercation at your parish over communion in the hand. Why don't you share that story before we get into the church fathers?
Yeah, without naming names, priests in town at one of the better parishes in town with a good pastor, one of the subordinate priests denied my wife, who was veiling. This is like an 80-year-old guy, so he's one of the true believers in the council, as you can imagine. And you know how you run across them, true believers?
Yeah, he's all about dialogue.
She's all about it, unless you're
right.
A somewhat younger woman who's veiling and trying to take on the time.
It has a bunch of kids in tow.
Right.
Yeah, and you're going to use this moment to make your stand on conciliar liturgical practice.
And he did.
Right.
This guy, so literally it all went down just like that. Denied her. She didn't, know what to do. Just ended up taking it on the hand. Came back, told me. I ran to the car to get. I'm
trying to see. I want to paint the picture here. So we got Steph. Everybody's met Steph 2 episodes ago. Beautiful woman. She got 5 kids with her.
Yes. Yeah, it was 5 then.
Yeah, and then she's got the veil on now. Does she kneel down?
I don't think she was trying to kneel. That I think she would tell you she does most weeks.
So she does the genuflect and she sticks her tongue out.
Right,
as is the proper praxis. And he says,
he's known for just with the people sticking their tongue out with eyes closed. He's known for passive aggressively waiting a couple extra seconds. So she said it felt like 10 seconds. Waited. Then he said, you have to stick your hands out. It's cold and flu season. And which is a bunch of crap. It happened in last April. It was recent actually, but it was out of cold and flu season. It was, we have 90-degree days here in Bakersfield and in 90-degree weather. Anyway, so she came back, told me. I ran to the car, got my phone, got up the letter that I'll read at least some from at some point, and proceeded to walk into the vestibule after Mass. And I said, happy afternoon, Father, or whatever you say, addressing your priest. I said, I have to approach you in a posture of filial piety. I literally said that.
You said that.
Just to get that out there. Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah,
I'm sure post-Vatican II guys love that kind of talk.
Yeah, I'm sure they get that all the time.
Posture of filial piety.
Yeah. And the sacristan was hanging around, and he knows that I kind of do silly dances sometimes if we're outside to the silly music, and he kind of laughs.
Are these liturgical dances?
Yeah, I do like fake liturgy. I mean, I did it like twice, and then he said, "Hey, you were caught on camera," sarcastically dancing to the idiotic music. But so I know Norm.
Can we get a clip of that?
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. We'd have to get it from this one parish, Bakersfield, California. I'd like to get one myself. But so he was in there, and he was kind of like, oh, what's going to happen? And I just said, hey, I don't want communion. You denied communion on the mouth to my wife, and this is unacceptable. And he's like, let me stop you right there. There are plenty of parishes you can go to town to get that, and this is not one of them. And I said, no, Father. That's absolutely wrong. I am not going to go to one of the other parishes where it would be ready-made. I'm coming right back here, and I'm finding your line. We're only going to go to your Mass, and you will give it to my wife. This is all in filial piety, mind you. And
posture.
Posture. And he said, no, it's cold and flu season. That comes from my boss. And I was like, as it happens, I have a letter from your boss's boss. The guy
behind the guy.
The guy behind the guy. And I read him the same stuff I'll read you here today, and it's very explicit about the spirit of unity and the new indult never being used to disrupt the spirit of unity. And forever on the books, communion by mouth is illicit all times and at all places. So boom, he didn't like. I pretty much dropped the mic, and I was like, "Have a nice afternoon. We're coming for you next time." The great part of the story is I got a bunch of my students as an extra credit project. I offered extra credit for them to all come to that guy's mass and to line up behind me and do it by mouth, because he doesn't want. So we had like a number of us just doing it by mouth, and he had to do it. And Steph went right in front of me. I was overseeing the whole thing, and it made muster. He gave it so passive aggressively on the mouth, even in the heart of 90-degree cold and flu season. So that's right. Coming up again in many dioceses around the country.
Right. So
I won.
Is you dropped the mic. So what's the right practice? I mean, there's two ways we can go about this, Tim. I think we should do both. One is the praxis, which is better when it comes to communion in the hand versus communion in the tongue. You get into problems like I've seen where people receive the host, the incarnate second person of the Trinity, and then walk off with it and don't consume it. That raises all kinds of red flags. Is this a witch? Is this a Wiccan? Is she going to go and use this host in a sacrilegious service? I've heard that in Mexico there are these brujas who, in Mexico, that if a woman can't get pregnant, or if she wants to seduce a man or whatever, the witch doctor will have them go and get a host for mass, bring it to them, and they'll use that in a concoction, potion.
Wow.
Yeah,
I've heard that too.
Which is completely, it's black magic, and you're desecrating the host. I mean, that's one of the sins reserved to the Holy See, is desecrating the host. That's a bad sin. That could never, ever happen with communion in the tongue. So it's like, let's reduce one of the worst sins that could possibly be committed on earth. I mean, it's right up there with like abortion, right?
Right.
I mean, at least an abortion usually can be remitted by a local priest. This sin can't. If you confess that in confession, I desecrated a host in black magic, that has to go to the Holy See. He can't just absolve you.
Right.
It's called a reserved sin. So it's a big deal. So if we just went to communion in the tongue, we could reduce that sin.
Right.
It's practical. But the other part is, what is the universal practice of the church, East and West, up until we had this wonderful springtime of liturgical restoration, a.k.a. Vatican II. Right?
And why? And what was the practice and why?
Right.
Yeah.
So let's, let's go early church first, and then the second part of the show, we'll get into the 60s and the 70s. And we'll look at the timeline of how it is that communion in the tongue became universal. That sounds great. The reason I say and why is because every time we mention this under our breath, in the comments, there's a response, and the response always goes, well, hey guys, I'll bet you didn't know this factoid, like the current events, like noise, they think in their imaginations, like throngs up onto the screen, and they say, spitting truth at y'all, there was communion in the hand in the early church. And we're always kind of like, yes, we know, everyone knows that. It's not a hidden factoid. No, I mean, like, but it's a different thing. It was basically a historically corrected error in the history of the church, where they're like, this isn't working out. So they change it whenever. Well, I wouldn't even say they changed it. It could very well be that communion on the tongue is the apostolic original practice. We don't really know.
Yeah. Because of the nature of the underground church.
Right.
But so whatever, they had the error or in the early church, that's fine. They also had Arianism, and like Arianism, they went away from it. But even when they were doing it in the early church, the motive, that's why I said and why, because the motive was different. But this is somewhat like having a bad habit. You work hard to correct it, And then in 1977, your priest or bishop says you should go back to that bad habit. That makes it even a stronger case, is what we're going to say here today. But anyway, we'll go in order.
And just to tag on to that, and all these other bad dudes called the Protestant reformers in the 1500s all said, let's go back to the back. We'll talk about that later. They all say, let's go to the bad habit. And the Catholic Church vehemently said, no communion in the hand to the Protestants. And then in the 1970s, the Pope and the bishops and the local priests were like, yeah, let's go back to that thing that the Protestants wanted to do. That'll be great for belief in the Eucharist. Didn't work.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So we'll do that. We're doing both. We're doing Church Fathers, and then we're doing 1960s and 70s. Okay, so fast facts. Our earliest reference that people use is Pope Sixtus I. All right, this is the beginning of the 2nd century. I will admit that what I'm about to say is questioned, right? But the tradition is that Pope Sixtus I decreed that sacred vessels should not be touched by lay people. This is a tradition you see in the East and the West, especially in the West. You see St. Jerome, for example, saying anyone who's not a subdeacon or a deacon or a priest cannot touch the chalice, can't touch the paten. Any of the sacred vessels, they can only be touched by the ordained. So that's a big
Jerome.
deal.
Yeah, he's
Jerome.
so solid.
Yeah, Jerome is solid. And why can they not touch the sacred vessels? Because the sacred vessels touch the precious body and blood of Jesus Christ. So it's actually a insulation towards the Holy Eucharist. Can't even touch the vessels that touch the Holy Eucharist.
Right.
So if that's going on in the beginning of the 2nd century, obviously, if you can't touch the chalice, you can't touch the host, because the host is more holy than the chalice.
Certainly.
That's a slam dunk, right?
Yeah.
So, and, we see that throughout the early church, that only the sacred ministers can touch the sacred vessels. In the early church, Father couldn't say to one of the ladies sweeping around the church, hey, can you grab that chalice and bring it to me real quick?
Right.
He would have to say to a deacon or a subdeacon, can you please go get that chalice? And a layperson would not touch it.
And are you saying, I'm not asking rhetorically, but are you saying then that this documented these documented examples surrogate for the lack of any documented examples of the more explicit question about reception, basically?
Right. Yeah.
We don't have them.
We don't have them. Yeah, we don't have them.
Got it. That's what I figured.
All right. Now, the next one we get, so we have to move up. And you have to remember, folks, if you're new to the conversation here, from the time of the apostles till 313, Christianity was an outlawed religion. So we have theological treatises, but when it comes to what were the architectural designs of churches, there were churches, how did liturgy work in a catacomb? All these we don't have this stuff. It's not recorded.
Right. And by its nature, the liturgy was hidden. And by its nature, the hiddenness of the liturgy, they didn't have like email where they could email each other all around the Mediterranean world and say, what are you doing at your hidden mass? There's nothing like that. So there's no mechanism of uniformity.
Yeah.
People don't understand that, and it has to be clear. Yeah.
Even when you get to Constantine, if you're not baptized, you leave midway through. The first part of the Mass is called the Mass of the Catechumens. You can come to that, but once we get into the Eucharist part, you have to leave. So even post-Constantinian, there's this mysterious veil over the Mass. And, people will say, well, the church got over that. Actually, folks, the church didn't get over that. We continued to veil the Eucharistic rite. In the East, that was done with an iconostasis.
Right.
They just walled it off. Right.
Right.
In the West, like in the time of Gregory the Great, the Pope, when he said the canon of the Mass, after lift up your hearts and all that, they put a curtain around him and closed him off. And he whispered the canon.
In the West. I didn't know that.
In the West.
Yeah.
And then we also use, drum roll please, Latin to veil the sacred actions of the Mass. This is used to veil, to hide, to preserve the mystery of what's going on.
Right.
So, all right. So this is a big quote that people who use communion in the hand or promote communion in the hand, they refer to this quote by St. Basil the Great. So he dies, I think, at 379, right before the Second Council. He says, the right to receive Holy Communion in the hand is permitted only in times of persecution, end quote.
Right.
So he is admitting that there is communion in the hand, that it is licit, but what's he say, Tim?
That it's of a conditional nature.
Precisely.
That and anything that's of a conditional nature is what we would call, if we were Vatican II fathers, the extraordinary form. I mean,
right.
and it's
right.
Much the same way they play with the so-called extraordinary form of the Mass, which they also try to limit. But the difference is on the books. I mean, if this is St. Basil, one of the first instances where we actually have diction discussing how much, what the frequency of communion by hand was. It doesn't sound good. It's not a strong case. It's actually kind of a stronger point to raise for people like us that don't like it, right? Because they say this is an emergency power, not of the president, but of everyone.
Yeah.
I like this. Yeah. I mean, everything, my ears are happy to hear all of it. I haven't heard necessarily all these before now. And it's like, yeah, keep feeding me, man. That's right. Good stuff. Yeah.
My hypothesis as I was going through all these quotes, and I've written several articles on this before back in like 2010, 11, just Google communion in the hand, Taylor Marshall, and they'll all come up. I actually Googled communion in the hand and my old article came up and I was like, sweet. And I found all these quotes. I put them together. I love it.
Very gratifying.
It's very gratifying. That doesn't
happen often.
When you Google something and you find your own stuff. But my take on this is I believe, this is just Taylor Marshall's belief. I can't prove it, but this is how I think things went down. The apostles administered Holy Communion on the tongue. We see these kind of things in the Old Testament where, a coal is applied to Isaiah's lips. We see prophets, they receive words from God that God places into their mouth. We see this in the Old Testament. So we have this idea that prophetic words are placed directly by God into the mouth. So I think the apostles were administering Holy Communion in the mouth. I think Anne Catherine Emmerich says that in the early church, in her visions, people receive on the tongue.
Oh, really?
Into the mouth, yes. I didn't look that up before the show. Maybe if anyone knows, leave a comment. I'll go look it up to verify it later.
That's one of those facts that's sure to fetch how convenient from the other side. That's kind of how it is with Anne. We should do a show on her.
Yeah, we'll do a show on.
I've never known how to feel about her. But.
We'll do a show on Emmerich. So that was the apostolic practice. Then you get into times of persecution. And then you have this need where the priests are being killed, the bishops are being killed. You have Christians who are in prison. And then you have this pastoral need of bringing the Eucharist to the imprisoned, to the martyrs. And this signals the exception of people touching the Eucharist.
So I was going to ask you, so is that the rationale, literally bringing it to Mamertine prison dwellers? That's all it is.
So the famous story is Saint Tarcisius, who was he was not a lay person, he was an ordained acolyte, which is an ordination, and he was bringing the Eucharist to Catholics who were in prison. He was stopped. He was ordered to give up the Eucharist. He was attacked. He would not give over the Eucharist. He consumed the Eucharist, and they killed him.
Right.
People will say, well, here's a guy who's not a priest or a deacon or ordained in the higher clergy, and he's touching the Eucharist. Yeah, but he's bringing it to Catholics in prison.
Right.
This is the quote from St. Basil. The right to receive Holy Communion in the hand is permitted only in times of persecution. Right. So the persecution created a pastoral need. The pastoral need gave the lay people this idea of touching the Eucharist. And so at this point, you have two practices in the church. Lay people touching the Eucharist, communion on the tongue. And those practices, because of persecution, live parallel until around the year 800, when it's done away with totally in the East and in the West. That's to me as a detective, looking at all the pieces, looking at the quotes, and saying, this is what I think happened.
Yeah, those connections are tight. They're almost inferential, right? I mean, I think that's the way historians are, like detectives, and I think your connections are all spot on. We've never talked about that angle of it before. What was I going to say? Yeah, so I mean, this also unpacks a little bit of the meaning of pastoral, which we were struggling with somewhat last time.
We weren't really struggling with it.
we were doing quite well with it, if you ask me or you. Yeah. But, well, I mean, I guess that's what they call false humility. We were nailing it last time when it comes to humility, pastoral care. We get one more example. I think this is a really nice, honest. They probably didn't use the silly neologism pastoral. That's pastoral care. In times of persecution, you may administer the Eucharist by hand, but it's somehow, when everyone in your party, everyone in the church, or most people, are persons of goodwill, and they didn't have the same kind of infiltrator that we do today, it's the opposite of hollow out. I'm always talking about an exception to a rule in law. It's called hollow out. An exception is like a little pinprick through fabric, and then you stick your finger through, and then you can put your whole body through. That's an exception at law. It gets destroyed. Or with your kids, you let one kid one time do it for a pastoral reason. All 8, however many of them are coming through the fabric, whole body.
Yep. Next.
And that didn't probably happen back then, I would hypothesize. There's no way to evidence it, but if everyone's of goodwill, you give a pastoral limited exception for the people that need it, handicapped, prisoners, whatever, and it seems to. I would guess it works.
Yeah, I mean, let's just put together a pastoral situation. Let's say myself and Father Hallowell are in jail, and you at midnight, sneak up to the jail. Back then, it's not like it is today. It's basically a stone room with bars on it. You can talk to the people and give food to them, right?
Yeah.
And you sneak up and you're like, Father, are you okay? And they're like, yeah, we were just tried today. We're going to be killed in the morning. And he's like, one last time, will you please? We want to receive our Lord. We want to be strengthened because we don't give up. We don't deny Christ in the last moment, because they're going to ask, well, you can go free if you just say, Kaiser Kurios, Caesar is Lord. And we don't want to disappoint our Lord. We want to be strengthened. We bring us the Eucharist. And you say, okay. And then you go to the church, you get the Eucharist, and you bring it to us, and we receive it. That's a really different situation than having 400 people at an assembly on Sunday.
Yeah.
In a time of peace.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
These are two men who are going to be violently murdered, not just like lethal injection, maybe beasts, or some kind of you just read their Diocletian martyrs. It's horrific, right? So it's a very violent death, and all we have to do is drop some incense to a statue, to an idol, or to say Kaiser Kurios, Caesar is Lord, and we go free. We just walk out. So that's a temptation. Like, we don't want to do that. We want to be strong for our Lord. Bring us the Eucharist. No one, your most radical trad, your most Latin Mass rad trad person in the world is not going to be like, that's wrong.
Of course.
Right? No one is going to say that.
Non-hollowed out exceptions are basically embraced by everyone. Like, everyone's like, that's way harder than anything the most rad trad Christian does today. To go to your death and die a violent death is frightening. And everyone knows that. They're chastened by that. They're like, I'm not going to criticize that.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's what Basil says. He says, the right to receive Holy Communion in the hand is permitted only in times of persecution, end quote. Now, the next one comes from the Council of Saragossa. So this is Spain. And so we're now going way west, Iberian Peninsula. 380. So this is 1 year after Basil dies, or Basil. People always get after us over these pronunciations.
Yeah.
This is the quote. Excommunicated anyone who dared to continue receiving Holy Communion by the hand. And this decree was later confirmed by the Synod of Toledo. So in Spain, 380, it's excommunicating anyone who insists, I want to receive on the hand. So 380 is the same century as Constantine.
Right.
It seems to be cleaning up this practice that's in the church. That's early. That's 380. I mean, it's not 180, but it's 380. It's patristic.
Well, it's the first well-recorded century of the church. But, people, that's why we always talk about the dark first 2.5 centuries is because it matters. Mm-hmm. That's pretty early. I mean, again, that sounds pretty good to me. The 380, we'll take it. And especially when you combine it with the other early facts from the 4th century, the first real recorded Christian century, it all militates in favor of, communion on the hand is bad. And pretty much everyone always knew it was at its best a necessary evil in conditional rare times.
Right. I mean, modern examples would be, I have a priest who's a military chaplain. He has said mass out in the wilderness. I've seen it. I don't know if I can say which country it is, but anyway, there's a great photo of him celebrating mass ad orientem in an ancient destroyed church, like an Eastern church that's been destroyed by the Muslims. He's celebrating mass ad orientem for soldiers. He has a beautiful chalice. He's elevating it, but he's wearing maybe it's the wrong word, but fatigue, like a uniform, like camo uniform, right? There's no vestments.
Yeah.
And it's a very powerful picture. I like it. And he told me they have these masses and then they they run and get in the helicopter and fly off. Right. So he's not wearing a chasuble. He might've been wearing a stole, but this is a pastoral emergency. These guys, a lot of them haven't had mass, these Catholics in weeks, just because he comes in, he says a mass, he flies out. He said they even have a special tabernacle that they can bring in and out that's locked. Right. This is a major pastoral need. Now, don't tell me after looking at that picture, well, he's not wearing vestments, so you don't have to wear vestments anymore.
Yeah. Of course, exactly. That's the point. I mean, same thing when. You could do this at any level of human life. Right. I mean, people don't, even in our day, with kids growing up playing video games, no one played their Game Boy when you were at home and you had full access to your Super Nintendo. You didn't do it. Game Boys are for the exception. It's for a long road trip you take with your grumpy dad driving the car. Yeah. Yeah, well, people understand what an exception is. It's liberals looking to hollow out. Yes. They pretend, I don't know, I don't understand what you're trying to say. It's like, yeah, you do. It's exceptional. When somebody has to helicopter in or sneak in to, the Mamertine prison, and it's all fast, it doesn't matter who's giving it, because now the ontological order of priorities moves to the Eucharistic celebration. Needs to happen. It needs to go forth. That's what you're focusing on. And now all of a sudden you go, oh, good. You're thinking the way liberals are usually thinking. This is just a discipline. This isn't doctrine. That really, you take it on mouth. That's a discipline. It's the norm. You think, oh, good. People of goodwill think that. Only a dirty, conniving, progressive, probably Freemasonic infiltrator into the church thinks we're going to take that exception and we're going to use it.
That's right.
Every ordinary Sunday, and we're not even going to allow people to take it on the mouth anymore. We want to universalize it.
Exactly. And that's what
give me that.
That's what little kids do. Like I say, no eating in the living room ever. Right. And then the kids will say, yeah, but 2 weeks ago, Jude was sick and you let him eat soup on the couch so we can all eat pizza in the living room. Again, it's an extreme. He's sick. He doesn't feel good. We let him eat soup on the couch. It's an exception. But those little kids, they're going to be all lawyer on me and try to tell me that they can hollow that out and they could eat in there now. No.
ACLU lawyer on you. Yeah,
Exactly.
It's like, what, I mean, and libs do the same thing with the mistranslation of the Decalogue commandment, thou shalt not murder. Right. We often in English say thou shalt not kill. And they're like, what about if, and it's like, here it comes. The little kid thing. It is like eating in the den. Negative. It's something about negative commandments, right?
Yeah.
When you say a negative commandment, you tend to put it in the absolute, and almost everything is conditional, right? Yeah. I mean, that sounds relativistic, but like, I guess never murder.
It's nuanced. It's nuanced. Yeah, it's
nuanced.
And that's
nuanced.
And that's what different. Adults do, not kids.
Right.
It's like kids do that and LBs do that, but nuanced, responsible people who create civilizations and create order understand nuances and conditions. Yeah,
kids, LBs among the decent, goodwill, and then a third class is progressives that are looking that know what they're doing. They're the only one of those three that know what they're doing. LBs are just
dumb,
simple-minded fools. And then kids don't have any context for anything. But the progs are the ones that do what we're discussing here today with ill will.
Word. All right, now here's another quote that I found in St. Leo. This is Leo the Great. He died in 461. This is Sermon 9 on the Gospel of John. I have to read the Latin because the Latin is the important part. It doesn't really work in English. So the Latin is hoc enim ore sumitor quod fide credetur. So he literally says, this indeed is received by means of the mouth, by which we believe by means of faith. Now, the word for mouth here, it's in the ablative. It's ore, O-R-E. And in the ablative, it's instrumental. So you could just say, he's not saying we receive it in the mouth, because everything you eat is in the mouth. But he says ore, by means of the mouth.
Yeah.
And so I argue that this is communion on the mouth, communion on the tongue. You receive it by means of the mouth, not by instrumentation of the hand, but by instrumentation of the mouth. That's the Latin. So I think that's important. Again, it's subtle. I realize it's not the best one. He doesn't say, and not by the hand. Right. But it's something.
People listening are probably like, abla what? Like ablative? What? You conjugate nouns? What? But this is why Latin is such an amazing language, and
exactly.
all the ancient languages, because there are all these clues. Misunderstandings happen vastly less frequently with Latin, because you can go to the clues and you can say, okay, what is the ablative case versus the accusative you would expect it in if you lent it that alternate meaning. It's in a different case. No offense, Americans don't even know what grammatical cases are.
Right.
But this is yet one more reason why both Latin is better, another disputed tradition, and on the mouth is almost universally accepted. That's a couple things at once.
If it had used the word in and then the accusative, I would translate that as into the mouth, which wouldn't be as strong.
Right.
You receive it into the mouth. That's not what the Latin says. The Latin has ore, by means of the mouth. So
you'd also wonder who his audience is that thinks you receive a food stuff in your ear or eye. It's like, I don't think you would take the time to bother this. Ink and parchment is expensive. Why would you?
Why would you waste time doing that?
You mean a hole doesn't open up on your forehead?
Right.
Like, yes. Yeah.
Right. So
mine doesn't.
If you don't know Latin, don't worry about it. We got other quotes too. But if you do know Latin, I think you see the point here. That what St. Leo the Great is saying in the 400s, mid 400s, that's when he's Pope, is that Catholics receive it by means of the mouth. Now, here's some really good ones. In 650, now we're getting into the medievals here. We're like late antiquity, early medievals. The Synod of Rouen, 650. Condemn the reception of communion in the hand by laity as an abuse. Quote, do not put the Eucharist in the hands of any layman or laywoman, but only in their mouths, end quote. You don't get any clearer than that. That's only put it in their mouth. not in their hands, 650.
Yeah.
The Sixth Ecumenical Council, so this is 680 to 681 in Constantinople, it forbade the faithful to take the sacred host in their hand, threatening anyone who disobeyed excommunication. Think about that, folks. Late 600s, if you do communion on the hand, you are excommed. Excommunicated.
Yeah.
This is not like, well, there's two ways to do it, and we prefer for y'all to do it on the tongue. That's our preference. But we want to give everybody freedom in the church. No. Excommunicated.
Yeah. Yep. It's a hard case to mount a defense against.
Right.
I mean, this is when they took stuff really seriously.
Yeah.
And you get excommunicated from the church, possibly sent to hell over this issue. It's really important.
Yeah. And this is ecumenical council. Right. Just to let it sink in, everybody, that is equal to Vatican II. Right?
You just raised a lot of hackles.
Yeah. Right. It's on the books. Also, the Roman Ordo in the 9th century, so this is 800s, assumes that communion on the tongue is normative in the entire Western Roman Church. And that's it. You get Thomas Aquinas. Let me read. I pulled out a quote from him on it because he addresses it. He says, this is Sumit Ology, Part 3, Question 2, Article 13. The dispensing of Christ's body belongs to the priest for 3 reasons. And then there's a little bit. And then he says, thirdly, because out of reverence towards this sacrament, nothing touches it but what is consecrated. Hence, the corporal and chalice are consecrated, and likewise the priest's hands for touching this sacrament. Hence, it is not lawful for anyone else to touch it, except for necessity, for instance, if it were to fall upon the ground, or else in some other case of urgency, end quote. So that's Aquinas. Only priests can touch it. By the way, in the Roman Rite, deacons can't touch a host. Like, I'll go to the line with the deacon. That's not really tradition. Deacons don't have consecrated hands. Priests have consecrated hands. Deacons do not.
Really?
That's right.
Oh, okay.
That's right.
I didn't know that.
Before Vatican II, a deacon could not touch a host, except for necessity. And he gives if it falls on the ground. So obviously, if the host fell on the ground, a lay person should pick it up. Mm-hmm. And he says some other case of urgency, that would obviously fall into St. Basil persecution time.
Right. That's interesting about the deacons.
Yeah, deacons, people are going to go ape and get mad at me on this. But I'm telling you, folks, deacons do not have consecrated hands. They are ordained. They can touch the sacred vessels. They do touch the chalice in the actual Mass, right there at the altar. But they don't touch the host. That's the Roman tradition. Only a priest and a bishop can touch the host. That's tradition. If you want to look at the mainstream tradition going back, only a priest. And that's what Thomas Aquinas says.
Yeah.
So just because you get in the deacon line, it's better, I guess. He is ordained.
Yeah. Yeah.
But his hands are not consecrated. And Thomas says only that which is consecrated can touch what is consecrated.
Right. Which makes sense. Yeah. I thought his hands were. Well, so that, I will not get in deacon lines ever anymore either.
The easiest thing is just go to the Latin Mass where it's all figured out.
Unless the Latin Mass
you don't have it.
100 miles away from you.
That's right.
But, I mean, I'm sort of presuming, you always say, hey, people, I don't know, maybe you don't want to go here, but I'd like to put this out. Yes, that's always it. When you say at the end of our shows, hey, you're not fully with us unless you're doing a daily rosary. Like, people respond to a challenge, you know,
right?
The kind of pop psych libby type wisdom where it's like, don't tell people to pray for a half hour a day. Just tell them to pray for half a minute a day. That interests precisely no one. People are more interested, if they're necessary, if the necessity of the changes can be demonstrated, as it amply is so regularly on this show. People are more interested in bigger changes. The human spirit is resilient and is quite quite willing to take on a challenge if it is deemed worthwhile. And many, people that are watching our show consistently have adjudged it worthwhile. I would say the same thing about if you have a nearby Latin Mass. I'm kind of just assuming that everyone's hopefully making the switch, because it is not arguable. It's not sufficiently close to make it arguable. Yeah. If you've got to travel an hour or 2 or 3 to a Latin Mass, I don't know anyone that's going to make that.
Yeah, it's hard, especially if you have kids. You got kids.
Yeah. Every Sunday we try to make. We're trying to make one a month.
Right.
There was one in town. The bishops play the shell game with it, but it's just an aside. I'm just saying, if you have the luxury,
if it's 15 minutes away, get there.
Get yourself to Latin Mass. That might be the moment I take out of time that actually gets us kicked off of YouTube. That's a dangerous thing to say, right? Most dangerous man in the world is the one who set the world free from the Matrix.
That's
Remember,
right.
But that's the Matrix.
And it's not about, some people say, well, they like these gotcha moments like, well, did you know that in the early church, originally in Rome, the Mass was in Greek? Yes, I knew that, of course. That's not the argument. We're not making a linguistic argument like Latin is better than English, even though it is. That's not the argument we're making. The argument we're making is when it comes to rubrics in actual text of the prayers said by the priest and by the people. Yeah, when you put them side by side on an Excel sheet, the 1962 missal is superior than the 1969 missal. I'm not saying the 69 is invalid. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm not saying it displeases God. I'm saying it's not as good as the 1962. An example is there's the old Rite of Exorcism, and then there's the new Rite of Exorcism that came out in the 90s. Every exorcist in the world will tell you that the one in the 90s is worthless. It doesn't get demons out. It's valid. It's licit. It's published by the Holy See. It's just not as good as the old one. The old one's more effectual. It's better.
Right.
End story.
Right.
It doesn't mean it's bad, folks. I'm not saying that. Everyone wants to say, well, you're saying, no, I'm not saying any of that. I'm just saying it's better.
Let's take a hard pass on really even talking about the Novus Ordo. People out there that have sensitive ears, I know it's a lot of soft folk these days have sensitive ears, so we don't want to be abrasive for your tympanic membrane. If you don't want to hear us talking about the Novus Ordo, good, we'll agree not to. Just everyone start getting yourself, if you have one, to a Latin Mass every Sunday. If you have one that's within 5 minutes or 10 minutes of your Novus Ordo parish, and everyone's got 10 Novus Ordos parishes within 10 minutes. Because to bring it back to the topic today, it's also because the lovely, important accidental properties of the Latin Mass, like Taylor said, you don't ever have to worry about really what we're talking about today. It's strictly academic. It's kind of interesting, the communion by hand. You don't ever have to worry about your priest telling you not to be kneeling in a prostrated position.
Because everybody's kneeling.
Because everyone's kneeling. Yeah. You don't have to worry about crappy, monkeys hymns, being played because it's all either no music or beautiful music, the way it should be.
Right.
At Latin Mass. You don't have to worry about all this side.
You don't have to worry about I want to go get in the priest line instead of the Eucharistic ministry line, because guess what? All there are is priests giving communion.
That's right.
There is no lay extraordinary minister of Holy Communion.
Right. So I'm just fleshing out what you said.
So all the problems,
it's not just a linguistic thing.
Yes, exactly. It's the whole package. It's the burrito wrapped up. It's way better. So let's see, we got Council of Trent. It says the fact that only the priest gives Holy Communion with his consecrated hands is apostolic tradition, end quote. Council of Trent, which is ecumenical council, says it's apostolic tradition that only the priest gives Holy Communion with his consecrated hands. Again, the idea that the hands of the priest are consecrated. The deacon doesn't have consecrated hands. A subdeacon doesn't have consecrated hands. An acolyte doesn't have consecrated hands. Your grandma doesn't have consecrated hands. Only a priest has consecrated hands. They actually anoint the hands at his ordination so that he can touch the Eucharist. He can confect the Eucharist and he can touch the Eucharist.
And so I want to take a moment and try to dispel the big demurrer number 2 that I've seen in the comments on our videos when we mention the Eucharist. Well, the mouth is dirty too, and hands aren't. Well, here are a couple arguments against it. Steph and I were talking about this last night. Jesus said specifically that the one place, or it's implied specifically, that the one place for which the Eucharist is being consecrated, created really, in his body, blood, soul, divinity, is for the gastrointestinal tract of a human being, of a confirmed human being, or at least a communicated human being, right, in the Catholic Church. That gastrointestinal tract begins on the tongue. We all know where it ends, but so it goes all the way through the body. It's clean in the sense that Jesus specified, which meant no foreign agents, right? There's also supposed to be a Eucharistic fast, so it's not touching like
hamburgers,
kosher, hamburgers, other bad food. But they did away with that, and that's part of the assault. But nevertheless, even if it touches other food in there or whatever, it's natural. So Jesus is speaking in the same sense that liberals, even when they try to make a demur here, would speak about their own kids not licking the floor. You don't want foreign agents. If you lick a doorknob, doorknobs are the most dangerous, icky known substance in our day-to-day lives. Why? Because they're strictly associated with this, the hand.
Yeah.
If a liberal's kid, a crock-wearing liberal, has his kid go and lick a doorknob, you will be vomiting in about 36 hours, the incubation period of the flu. So Jesus is speaking in basically the common parlance. He's saying, I want this to be digested by human beings. And the hand is dirty in a way that the mouth isn't, even if, yes, we should brush and use Listerine. He doesn't mean that aspect of hygiene. He means free from foreign agents, foreign foods, and any external contact, particulate matter that comes into contact with your hand. So please don't even bother to make this distinction.
It's kind of amazing that our ancient forebears thought of this. Who's the only person in Mass who washes his hand in the liturgy? The priest, the guy with the consecrated hands. Now, we created this new liturgical idea of pumping the Purell bottle for the so-called lay ministers of Holy Communion, which is a joke. It's tacky and it's not in the liturgy. And it reveals to the eyes who want to see that this is not liturgically correct.
It's protesting too much.
Yeah. Yes, we already know that there is a sacred rite of the lavabo, washing the hands of the priest so that he can touch the Eucharist and have clean hands, ceremonially clean hands, in the actual liturgy. It's been there since day one. So we can't have all the Eucharistic ministers do the lavabo, so they pump the Purell. It's so dumb. But I like your argument, Tim, on how the mouth is the beginning of the gastrointestinal tract, but I'm going to do you one better. People say, and I've heard them, well, the priest's hands are anointed and consecrated for the Eucharist, but our tongue isn't. That's because you don't know about pre-Vatican II. If you go back to the baptismal rite before they changed it in Vatican II, guess what happens? The baby's tongue, or the adult's tongue, is consecrated. It's in the rite. They took it out at Vatican II. The priest prays an exorcism, and he places blessed, consecrated salt on the tongue of the infant to, in a way, whet their appetite for the Eucharist. It's in the rite.
Wow. Yeah.
Get a book, get a missal, get a Latin Mass missal, and go read the baptismal rite that's in there. And you'll see that the newly baptized person has a consecrated tongue for the purpose of receiving the Eucharist. So guess what, folks? The ancient Roman rite already thought of all this stuff. We don't have to go fix it. We don't have to change it. It's all there. So technically speaking, now if you were baptized after 1960 whatever, or 70 whatever, your tongue wasn't consecrated because they wanted to get rid of that. It doesn't fit their theology. But every Catholic who was baptized before the 1960s, they were all walking around planet Earth with consecrated tongues at baptism. Beautiful. Yeah. It's beautiful.
It's powerful stuff.
Another reason to get your infants baptized in the old rite. And by the way, it doesn't have to be an FSSP or Institute Christ the King or a Latin Mass priest. Every priest on earth can do the extraordinary form baptism, and you can ask for it as a layperson. Say, Father, my baby's going to be born in 4 months. Also, it's a sin to delay infant baptism. I can't remember the exact, but I think it was John Paul II who said more than 3 weeks is wrong. Earlier, it was more than 8 days. But if you're waiting like 3 or 4 months, that's mortal sin. You can't do that if you know.
Yeah.
You can't delay baptisms. So you say, Father, my wife is due on September 21st. I'd like to pencil in the following Saturday for a baptism. He should say yes. And you can say, and I would like the baby to be baptized in the extraordinary form.
Right.
See what happens.
Right.
You should do that.
We did. We had Abby baptized in the extraordinary form. Did we have Maggie? I think Abby and Maggie. I think it was difficult to get the twins done in the extraordinary. Yeah, but this was at a Novus Ordo parish, so we're walking, talking proof.
And a lot of priests actually will they're kind of giddy to do it. They're like, oh yeah, I want to do the old rite. You know,
yeah,
they may be afraid or not able because of the bishop to do an extraordinary form mass every Sunday morning. But if you say, hey, can we do the extraordinary form baptism? No one's around.
Easy. Yeah, no one's around. It's private.
They'll do
it. Yeah, that's how it was. Even at one of the least traddy parishes in town is where we had both Abby and Maggie baptized. Yeah, both I believe of our first 2 kids were extraordinary form.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and also cool. You get the main differences between the old baptism rite and the new Vatican II one is that the old one has your baby gets 3 exorcisms, drive out any demons, which is important if you ever had Freemason ancestors. Those Freemason ancestors took oaths on their future progeny, satanic oaths to Bahamut and whatnot. So you have these false oaths that are being passed down generation to generation. Father Ripperger talks about this all the time. So in order to break these oaths and break satanic bonds on your family, there are these exorcisms for other reasons as well. There's 3 of them in the old rite, and the tongue gets consecrated with the blessed salt. There's some other things too, but that's the main difference.
Do they explicitly mention Bahamut or however you say that?
The Freemasons?
Yeah.
Yes.
Do they say specifically to Bahamut?
Yeah, and they invoke these horrible punishments like may my head be cut off and put on a spire of a church, and may my intestines be it's all these horrible oaths.
The Simpsons has a hilarious spoof of Freemasonry, the Stonecutters episode, and the oaths are spoofed very effectively. Yeah, very specific.
So they take these oaths, and these are real demonic oaths, and they also apply them to their kids. So this is really bad. This is bad stuff, folks. So, on YouTube, there's lectures by Father Ripperger who talks about these intergenerational demonic influences on your family, and you want to make sure that those get broken.
Yeah, didn't you say you thought you might have had?
No, my grandfather was a Freemason, and so we actually had Father Ripperger pray the Exorcism Prayer over myself, my wife, and all of our kids. Just bam, 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 chop it off.
Yeah, chop it off, cut off those strings, those less than golden strings. A lot of, I'd say 4/5 of the good, solid Catholics that I know, maybe 3/5, were Protestant converts. The converts tend to be better than cradle Catholics when they take it seriously. But also of those same ones, like yourself, there's a strong connection, particularly in the American South, between Protestantism and Masonry.
That's right.
In the 1800s. So a lot of these best present-day Catholics today that were Protestants 10 years ago, 110 years ago, had oftentimes, most commonly, Masonic relatives. So it's
correct.
It's not a nitpicky detail the way it sounds.
Yes, Freemasonry
a lot of people have this.
in Texas historically is huge. There's also a deep connection between Freemasons and the Ku Klux Klan in the South. People don't know that.
Very deep.
Yeah.
Very, very deep. Yeah. Just look at Justice Hugo Black. I've said this before. Look him up. He was a Klansman, a Mason, was known for giving the best anti-Catholic speech you ever heard.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway.
And also the Freemasons and their rituals have mockeries of receiving the Eucharist.
I did know that.
Yeah. So it's very satanic. It's very wrong. It's mortal sin. And it also makes fun of Catholicism, mocks Catholicism with false oaths. And, just as we Catholics pray blessings upon our children and our future progeny, as God said to Abraham to 1,000 generations, so Satan also wants to place curses and bonds on you and your kids and your grandkids. So this is why, and this is not just Freemasonry, it's magic and witchcraft and going back to, I don't know, the days of Adam and Eve. I don't know how far back magic and, all this bad stuff goes back, but the church has always recognized this and therefore done 3 exorcisms on every single baby at baptism. Right. Like, let's break the bond. And it doesn't mean that your baby has its head twisting around and is vomiting and,
pea soup.
1973 exorcist. That's not necessarily what the exorcism is trying to accomplish. It's trying to break these bonds over your family, over your kids. Very important. Tim, why would the church want to remove exorcisms from infants?
There's no good reason.
I mean, what comes to my mind is Bunini, the guy who created all these liturgies, was a Freemason.
Right. Yeah, it's pretty see-through when you go, why would the church want to remove, around the exact same time, St. Michael prayer, which contains a mini exorcism, right?
That's right.
Why would you want to remove the oath against modernism in 1968? St. Michael's prayer is gone in 69. Oath against modernism is gone in 68.
St. Michael prayer was in 65.
Oh, it was in 65?
Leonine Prayers were removed in 65.
Okay, so
right when the council was over.
In what you'd call the not the antebellum period, the interregnum period, close of the VC2 council, and the purpose of it, the release of the Paul VI missal, those are 5 years.
Right.
We've talked about this much. Look at all the strikes in those 5 years, setting up the new mass. And also within those 5 years is when these guys, Bunini types, began working to get the indult for communion on the hand.
That's
by
right.
The hand.
That's right.
And it took them, the early, we can go through the chronology eventually, but they started working on this in that time period too.
Yeah.
It's too obvious, people.
Yeah. Okay. So let's look at that timeline of the 60s. I actually just made a mistake. Yeah. I said the Leonine Prayers, which has the St. Michael prayer at the end of Low Mass, was suppressed in 65. It was actually on September 26, 1964. So it happened the Second Vatican Council was ended in 65. It was actually on the implementation of Sacrosanctum Concilium that Paul VI revoked the Leonine Prayers, which was at the end of Mass, they would say the Hail Holy Queen, 3 Hail Marys, the St. Michael prayer, and a prayer for the state of the church. At the end of every low Mass, basically every daily Mass. These were decreed originally by Pius IX, and then Leo XIII added the St. Michael prayer, allegedly because he saw a vision later it said of demons gathering on Rome. Some sources
we've covered that.
Yeah, we've covered it.
So link to that video.
Yeah. So, everyone's like, if we could just follow Sacrosanctum Concilium, I used to say that all the time. Let's just go back to Sacrosanctum. Now I read Sacrosanctum Concilium from Vatican II, and I think there's a lot of weaponized ambiguity in this document. I don't like it. And I'm now not a huge fan of Sacrosanctum Concilium because of the weaponized ambiguity. And also, the very first thing that it did was suppress the Leonine Prayers, the St. Michael prayer, the Hail Holy Queen, and 3 Hail Marys. That's just a bad idea.
Right. So, yeah.
So 65, Vatican II ends. In 65, there's sort of an intermediate missal that was introduced. Some people call it the 65 missal. It allows some vernacular. Altars are supposed to be freestanding. It omits the Judica Psalm at the beginning, at the foot of the altar. It takes away the last gospel. And of course, the Leonine Prayers are gone. So it's kind of it's just inching its way towards the whole Novus Ordo. It's kind of cutting some of the parts off of it, but it's still, if you went to it, you would still think you're at a Latin Mass. But you'd be like, wait, why is some stuff missing?
Right. Okay, you want it?
I got a few more
chronology.
Well,
oh yeah.
Well, you're going to do the 70s.
Yeah, so that's a big jump forward in time.
Well, there's a couple more things here. In 67, communion in both species was allowed. So the laity were allowed to receive the precious blood. That's a big deal, right?
Would you talk a little bit about that? Because people that are learning, burgeoning knowledge, conservatives, think that they're doing good by taking both species at the Novus Ordo.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think it's wrong, but going all the way back to especially Thomas Aquinas, it's always been understood that in the body is full Christ, body, blood, soul, divinity.
Right.
He's resurrected, which means his blood is inside of his body.
Right.
Right. We believe Jesus is resurrected. His blood is in the body. So if you receive the body, you receive the blood. If you receive the blood, you receive the body. It's not like he's still dead and is at the right hand of God the Father. His body's here and his blood is here. And so if you don't receive from the chalice, you're not getting the blood. Not true. You get the whole Christ if you receive just the body. Because of that, in the West, we receive only the body because, and trust me, I used to be an Episcopalian priest. When you administer the chalice, you have the problem with drops, especially with people who are handicapped, to no fault of their own, especially when you have homeless people coming who aren't always instructed, and when you have younger people, like a 11-year-old, a 9-year-old. Administering the chalice is super tricky. And of course, I know Anglican priests, it wasn't the real body and blood, but it was real drops they have to deal with. And with the host, you have the paten under the chin. So if they somehow misses the tongue, it falls on the paten, not on the floor. With the chalice, there's no real way. If a drop hits the ground, that's a big deal. That's the blood of Jesus. Right. So because of this, it was restricted to the celebrant, to the priest. And it's okay. You're still getting the full Christ. Now, the full symbolism is in receiving both, but it's not necessary to receive both species. 1967, they brought it back.
Yeah, you're giving basically the answer I would have given. I wanted to hear what you said first, or the answer that I regularly give. I say, look, it's one of these sort of double pale reflections because it seemed like a pious thing to do. The subtext, as you just articulated, clearly actually confuses the faithful on body, blood, soul, divinity. It makes it seem like you need body and blood. You're not allowed to receive 2 communions in one day, right?
You are.
Daily mess.
You can.
Are you?
Yeah, you can. You can receive
Up
2.
to 2?
Yeah, you can binate, yeah. For example, like let's say you went on Saturday morning and then there's a wedding Saturday night or Saturday afternoon, you can receive it both.
But can you go to 2 daily masses and receive it 2 daily masses?
I think you can. I think this has been settled. Yeah.
Has it?
I think you can. Well,
but so, yeah, the point
I might be wrong. Correct me out there if I'm wrong, but I remember looking into it a few years ago, and there is a way that you can receive twice a day. It's not banned, but I might be wrong. And it might be before Vatican II. That wasn't a lot. I don't know. From what I understand, currently you can have both or twice a day.
Yeah. Irrespective of that would have added force to the point. But irrespective of that, it bifurcates in the mind of the faithful. Oh, if he's getting the body and there's also a line for the blood, I need to get both, and that's a strike against the notion of the hypostatic unity of these 4 elements. So there's that, and then 2, greater chance for desecration, which is spilling, and 3, I don't know how people who receive from the chalice get around. These are the same people a lot of times, the liberal ex-nuns drinking from the cup. They're the ones saying that it's unhygienic to to take the Eucharist, a separate soul Eucharistic wafer, on the mouth. I don't know how you get around the hygienic argument with the chalice.
If you're worried about cold and flu season, I mean, everybody drinking from the same cup is definitely worse. People would say, oh, well, you would never get sick from the precious blood. Well, we believe the accidental properties are there. And if someone spits on the edge of the cup and you drink it, you are getting that spit. All that being said, it's not necessary. It's not needed. To insist that both are needed is heretical. So don't ever do that. Don't ever say I have to have both the body and the blood. That's condemned by Trent.
Liberal priests in town say I want everyone to get both. So it's borderline.
To say that you have to have both is anathematized. To say I want you to have both is just pastorally misleading. Yeah.
And I just look at when it happened, 67. So that tells you all you need to know. If it was an old tradition from, 967 instead of 1967, then it's like, okay, I won't question the motives. That brings us back to, I think, the real beating heart of today's show. If there's an error or something that's maybe misleading in its subtext from 967, I totally trust it.
Right.
If it's from 1967, don't trust it. Do the opposite of anything they were doing. The rule of George Costanza. Right. Take your 60s, 70s impulses and do the opposite.
Do the opposite. Yeah. Good one. So, I want to real quick talk about, I forgot this quote by Cyril of Jerusalem, which is the one every communion in the hand person. This is what they brought up in the 60s. They said, look, Saint Cyril of Jerusalem is a saint, and he says, approaching, therefore, do not come with palms of the hands outstretched, nor with fingers apart, but making the left hand a throne for the right hand, since this hand is about to receive the king, making the palm a hollow, receive the body of Christ, adding amen. You will see that cited on every single Novus Ordo website in the universe. They love that quote, and they say, look, the early church fathers, they received communion like this. They never give you the second part of the quote. Here's the second part of the quote. Then, this is the text, then, carefully sanctifying the eyes by touching them with the body, partake of it, ensuring that you do not mislay any of it. For if you mislay any, you would clearly suffer a loss, as it were, from one of your own limbs. Tell me, if anyone gave you gold dust, would you not take hold of it with every possible care, ensuring that you do not mislay any of it or sustain any loss? So will you not be more cautious to ensure that not a crumb falls away from that which is more precious than gold or precious than stones? Then, he goes on to say, then after you have partaken of the body of Christ, come forward only to the cup of the blood. Do not stretch out your hands, but bow low as if making an act of obeisance and a profound act of veneration. Say amen, and sanctify yourself by partaking of Christ's blood also. While the moisture is still on your lips, touch them with your hands and sanctify your eyes, your forehead, and all other sensory organs. Finally, wait for the prayer and give thanks to God, who has deemed you worthy of such mysteries, end quote.
Yes, you're not going to want to listen to him.
So we want to not follow this. This is not, now maybe Cyril said this. If he did, he was gravely misled. I don't think Cyril said this. This is insane. Receive the body of Christ and touch it to your two eyes.
Like, no, don't.
Don't do that. This is superstitious. And then when you receive the blood with the moisture, touch it to your eyes and your forehead and to your sensory organs. The precious blood of Jesus. This is superstitious. Don't do this, people. And this is why it's so dishonest. I'm talking to you, liberals. It's dishonest for you to use the first part of this quote to have Jesus as a throne in your hands and omit the rest.
Well, it's proof texting. It's the worst form.
If you want to restore communion in the hand like that, then go do all the rest of it. No, don't. Touch the host to your eyeballs. Take the precious blood off your lips and touch all five senses. No, don't do that. It's bad.
Also, there's the entire fact that's like the purloined letter on the mantle here that makes the case really obvious. Even if St. Cyril said all of this without all the wackier stuff, all of it's wacky. Communion on the hand is wacky, but if let's say that he just full on endorsed it in a rational seeming way, none of the touch it to your sensory organs bit, And he was just one early apostolic father that had it wrong. It shows so much that all of these dissenters and innovators from the 1960s and 70s get really excited that there's one. It's like, but literally every other writer, early writer and father on this is countervailing. Right. Yeah. So it shows a lot that they're like, oh, we can, and this is what you were saying about restoration in one of our last shows. It shows a lot that they're really pumped that they found one quote from one kind of early father, not Augustine or Ambrose or Thomas on any of these, but one minor father where he is as errant as they are, but with far less midnightly motives. It shows a lot. That bespeaks everything. They're like, we got one. Yeah, okay, but I have 1,000 saying do it the real way.
Right. At any time on social media, if I put up something on communion in hand, don't do it, I will get 3 to 4 immediate responses. St. Cyril said we could do it.
I know.
And I always say, go read the full quote, dude. He said you can do it, and you can also rub the sacred species all over your sense organs. Do you do that?
Right.
No.
Right.
It's bad.
Right.
All right. So anyway, I wanted to cover that in the beginning part, and then I just looked at my notes and realized that's the money quote that everyone watching is going to say, but St. Cyril of Jerusalem. Right. Use your hand as a throne. They always say that. It's bogus. So 69, the Novus Ordo was promulgated April 3rd by Paul VI. And now I'm going to hand the mic to you, and you're going to talk about the indult for communion in the hand as we wrap up today's show.
Yeah, just look at the first 3 national conferences that made this possible. Belgium, May 31st, 1969. Just think about the St. Gallen Mafia, people. No jokes.
Right.
Explicit connections. I don't mean connotatively. I mean denotatively. They are, we now know from the likes of James Grine, there is sort of a proto-St. Gallen Mafia before the 90s that was evidently meeting some membership, before 1969, it would appear. Belgium is May 31st, 1969, communion in hand. France, a week later, June 6th, 1969.
Wow.
These are all the represented St. Gallen parties. Germany, same day, June 6th, 1969, 1 week after Belgium. The Netherlands is a couple months later in September. Luxembourg, October 15th. Scandinavia, October 15th. All that northern European bloc.
But Tim, those Catholic dioceses are so orthodox. Not.
Right.
Not.
Exactly.
These are all the usual suspects of Vatican II. The most liberal, progressive, anti-Tridentine, anti-Roman Rite, pro-Bugnini nations. They're all the first ones saying, we want communion in the hand, just like Martin Luther and John Calvin and John Knox and Zwingli. We want to be just like them.
Well, they say the Reformation never left Germany, even the German church that stayed in. And you remember that German block of cardinals I told people to go watch that wouldn't shake Benedict's hands. It's just a list. I'm looking at it here on my phone. I don't know if you can see that. No,
can't see it, but I see your driver's license.
Read that text. Yeah, I look like a maniac. I look really angry in my license. But it's just a list of countries that just fell in line week by week, month by month, from 69 really to 71. It's just many of the countries in Europe. And then some of the latecomers included the United States, Scotland, Malaysia, Singapore, Papua New Guinea, Ireland. I'm surprised Ireland wasn't on the boat earlier.
So what year was America? USA?
America was June 17th, 1977, one of the very last ones. We're the third latest country to get it. And I want to read.
And we should say here, this is an indult, which means the Pope's allowing you to have an exception against what's on the books. The books still say in Rome, no communion on the hand.
Right.
That's the official discipline of the church. But the Pope is granting indults, which is exceptions to these countries.
Right. So people need to rewind 15 seconds and listen to him say that again to steel you up. It's an exception. It's an extraordinary form. It's an indult. And so we are now in the heart of cold and flu season, right? I never get colds in December. My immune system holds me out. I always start getting them January, February, March. And your bishops are going to be saying, quote, cold and flu season, we're not allowing it, right? And here, listen from the Sacred Congregation for Divine Worship's letter in response alla demande to presidents of all of those conferences of bishops and more that I just read from. And the letter, the indult letter, attaches to the first country which received it, which was Belgium, Sankt Gallen Mafioso, May 29th, 1969, in an Acta Apostolicae Sedis. It says, in reply to your request for your conference of bishops regarding permission to give communion by placing the host on the hand of the faithful, I wish to communicate the following. Now I skip a little bit of the boring boilerplate. Listen to this. This is what I read to that priest last cold and flu season. It's coming up again. The new manner of giving communion must not be imposed. And this is how I read it too. I mean, he was right in my face.
Dramatic reading.
Dramatic read. Yeah. Acting out parts. The new manner of giving communion must not be imposed in a way that would exclude the traditional practice or the ordinary practice. It is a matter of particular seriousness that in places where the new practice is lawfully permitted, every one of the faithful have the option of receiving communion on the tongue, and even when the other persons are receiving communion in the hand, meaning even if most people are getting the exceptional way. The two ways of receiving communion can, without question, take place during the same liturgical service. This is another one of those arguments they trot out. Boom. Unity does not require homogeneity in this sense. There is a twofold purpose here that none will find in the new rite anything disturbing to personal devotion toward the Eucharist, which I do. This is one.
Yeah, right.
There's two there.
Right.
That this sacrament, number two, that this sacrament, the source and cause of unity by its very nature, will not become an occasion of discord between members of the faithful. And then it goes on to say the rite of communion in the hand must not be put into practice indiscriminately, which it has. Right. Since the question involves human attitudes, this mode of communion is bound up with the perceptiveness and preparation of the one receiving, meaning you need someone that's not using it to desecrate. That's all you need to know. People receive by mouth. I mean, if you have to go to a Novus Ordo, like I more or less do, because you don't have a Latin Mass in your town, and you have to do it, it's a necessary evil. But it is not a necessary evil to bow to the priest. If he tries to deny you, you fight it. And if he tries to deny you and make you take in the hand, either stay and
pull out the phone,
or just don't receive and say,
or send them this video. Say, watch this.
Send them this vid. Yeah. And we'll take care of him for you. We got your back.
We got you.
But you can also tell him, okay, well, I'm not going to receive then, and you just denied me communion. And then you can tell everyone in your town, my priest denied me communion for no good reason.
Right.
In defiance of the Congregation of Divine Worship.
Yeah. Bogus.
Don't receive by hand.
Now, there's some people out there that are like, well, receiving on the tongue is gross because he's going to touch my tongue. Listen, people, I have only received communion on the tongue forever. And in the last 10 years, guess how many priests have touched my tongue? 0. Not one priest has ever touched the membrane of my tongue while giving me Holy Communion. Because if you do it right, the priest never touches anybody's tongue. That's what's so beautiful about it. Everyone's like, ooh, he's putting his hand in every person's mouth. No, he's not. Now, here's how you receive communion on the tongue. Because a lot of people are watching this like, okay, Tim, I'm sold. I want to do it, but I'm not sure. The wrong way to do it is this. And make a little slot where he has to put the quarter in the machine. That's nasty. He will touch your lips. It's gross. He doesn't want to do it. When he sees that person, he shudders inside because he's like, I'm going to have to touch this person's mouth. And it's going to be gross, but I got to do it because they don't know what they're doing. The way you receive communion is you open your mouth as big as you possibly can and stick your tongue out as far as you can. You got to go for it. Everything open. It's like a helicopter is going to land and save your family, and you want the helicopter pad to be as big as possible so he doesn't fall off the building, right? So you want to make your landing pad huge, right? So the mouth is fully open, your tongue is fully out, and trust me, he doesn't think this is gross. He's relieved that you're doing it right.
Absolutely.
The tongue is out, and then the other trick that I learned is you want to close your eyes. The reason for that is if your eyes are open, you're naturally going to want to track his hand, right? And if it's a moving target, it's harder for him. And he's going to maybe touch your lip or your tongue, which is bad.
Right.
So you close your eyes, stick your tongue out, open your mouth. He will put it on the tongue. He won't touch any part of your body. The host will touch your tongue, and you're good to go. Do that. All right.
That's good.
That's a show. That's a wrap. Everybody, if you're not praying the rosary every day, 5 decades, you're not on our team. You're not TNT. You got to pray the rosary. That's what Our Lady of Fatima asked. You got to be praying the rosary. Look, you got to get with the early church, communion on the tongue.
Not if you want to be on the team.
You don't want to be like Belgian bishops or Netherlands bishops or whatever. You don't want to be that.
They're icky.
Yeah, you want to go with Thomas Aquinas and the Council of Rouen and Saragossa and all that. So pray the rosary. Don't lose hope. Be positive. Be optimistic. Be happy. Christ wins. That's it. Signing out.